Dan, it is so good to see you. So glad you're here. This is our 51st celebration of the Urban Affairs Coalition. Can you believe it?
Sharmain, I can't believe it. I sometimes think that you and I have been together for all 51 years, but you look too great, and I'm not that old, so nor are you. But listen, this is
Absolutely.
such
We'll always be young at heart, right?
exactly. But I have to say this, Charmaine. When I reflect on all the incredible things that have gone on at the Urban Affairs Coalition over the years, with your incredible leadership, with a great board, a great team, you've changed communities and you've made us all believe that we can become a more unified, a more equal, and a more progressive community in the sense of reaching out and helping as many people as we possibly can.
Well, Dan, I really want to thank you for all of your support, your mentorship. As I tell everyone, I used to work for Dan. He was my boss, but he says he was never my boss. So, but we did have an opportunity to actually work together in healthcare. And I learned an awful lot from him, and he will tell you that he learned an awful lot from me. So it's just been a great relationship over the years. Dan, this has been a very, though, unusual time, I think, for so many of us. I mean, starting with COVID-19, then looking at issues of racial injustice and unrest, the election. There's just been a lot that's been going on. And as you know, this has created, I think, on the one hand, certainly a lot of pain and angst and concern. But at the same time, I think it's created some space for us to broaden our conversation around a very, very important topic that both you and I have talked about over the years, and that is, what do we do to ultimately end racism? So I really appreciate you joining this conversation today, because I hope that this will be a catalyst for others to feel comfortable to talk about what I call the R word. We've talked about, discrimination and other kinds of things, but racism is at the core of a lot of the concerns that we have. So thank you so much for being a part of this and being a great partner, not only as an individual, but as an organization, for us to really move this conversation and this work ahead.
Well, Charmaine, I can't thank you enough for including me and asking me to be part of this discussion. You and I have worked together on a lot of initiatives, too many to really count here, but at the heart of each one of them was an effort to break down barriers, to break down walls between peoples, between communities, between neighborhoods, between government and the private sector. And so this is a natural extension of that. And you're right, it's not an easy conversation. And I hope and I know from our past experience, our lifetime of experiences together, that we will do our best to share from the heart and be part of a healing process, and B, developing a roadmap where equity is at the heart of everything we do.
Thanks, Dan. That's absolutely terrific. And again, thank you. As you think about talking about racism, I think a lot of it we forget is really personal. The idea of how we feel about others, whether it's the power of women or whether it's Native Americans, or whether it's people who've grown up in different countries, how we think about each other, a lot depends on what our families say. So when you think about talking about racism in your own family, and I know you're now a grandfather like I'm a grandmother, how are you going to have that conversation with your grandson or your granddaughter?
Well, Sherman, I'd like to take a step back before I answer that question specifically. And here's what I'd like to say. I've learned so much over the past, as many of us, regardless of our race, regardless of our background, have learned over the last several months. And the conclusion I've come to that how we feel about others regardless of how we classify them in terms of gender or race or sexuality or whatever it might be, is really a personal, individual journey of the mind, of the heart, and of the soul. And I think that for me to progress on that journey, it has been an opportunity, or I've taken the opportunity to look in the mirror and really assess as best I could what do I think in terms of other people's. Do I have negative thoughts that I just can't help? They come into my mind. What is in my heart? And then frankly, when you combine the both, what's in my soul? And so I have identified areas where I feel that I need to rethink and reboot my mind and reboot my heart so that I can be a beacon for my family members, for my friends. And I think it's as basic as not tolerating comments or jokes at the expense of others, whether it be a physical or behavioral issue that might be obvious, whether it be race or religion or anything. You just cannot tolerate it. And it starts with yourself. And so now to get to answering your question, as I live and learn, and really where I need to change my mind, my heart, and my soul related to racism, I need to be the one in my family that helps my children and their children, our relatives, understand that that's my perspective on this, and that this is a journey that we as a family, and as the ripple effect goes out, we as a neighborhood, we as a broader community, need to really focus on getting our hearts, our minds, our hearts, and our souls right. And so with our grandchildren, I think it's in some ways easier than for those of us who have lived on this earth for a period of time. Even my children, who are range from their early 30s to their early 20s, they've had life experiences. And so it's about saying to my grandchildren at a very early age how we should feel about others, how we should be inclusive, how we should love regardless of the way someone looks or where they're from, and how we should be a beacon for them as well of peace, of comfort, and of acceptance.
Thank you, Dan. I absolutely agree. I think making sure that we have a personal commitment to ending racism gets us past the statement that I love to tease my husband about, which is this about what you do, or is this about what you just say? I think it will make a huge difference when our families, our friends, our neighbors see that this is about what we do and that we do it on a consistent basis. And yet we don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Right.
We know that, people are going to make some mistakes along the way, but it's going to be the consistent work along this path that I think ultimately will make a huge difference.
So Sharmain, how do you beyond articulating it, I love the way you say is it what you feel or just what you say, and how do you see us as a community, a broader community, doing just that, coming together, continuing to have honest conversations, but then actualizing it and helping each other along a journey of change where change is needed?
Dan, you're absolutely right. I think part of it, though, is that we don't want to miss the time of actually talking and sharing and really talking about our own personal experiences. I had an opportunity several years ago to talk to a friend of mine, and I said, you know what, who was white, and I said, you know what, I'd love to be able to have some dinners where you invite somebody who's Black in your network, I'll invite someone who's white, and let's just have some conversation, and we're not, and it can't be political. So I don't want you to come and just talk about your candidate or your political point of view. I want you to come and for us to talk about our own personal experiences. And so we did about 5 of those, which was absolutely tremendous. People who came were excited by the conversations and were willing to share and started to build some bridges across various ideas as well as relationships. So I do believe that that part of really talking is absolutely critical. The other thing I think, Dan, is the tough part of really going back and really understanding history. How did we get here? We've tried to sort of pretend as if, slavery in 1619 it kind of sort of happened. It really wasn't that bad, was it? Or it's like over, right? Through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the period of hate and lynching, through the civil rights movement to today, it is critical that we also take the time to look at history, not from that I am saying, Dan, you did something wrong, but it's like saying, let's really sort of understand where racism came from. It came from an economic institution that was created by slavery, which then we constructed race as a way to justify it. We said, well, the reason that we can actually enslave someone is because they are inferior. And that then built the construct of how institutions responded to this whole issue of race and has built on top of it over time. So we have to get past the point of saying, is someone calling me a name? To let's really sort of understand how this really got started, what happened, so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again. I think, as you know, Bishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa talked about the fact that to reconcile and to really drive change, we have to know the truth. And when we know the truth, it's an old adage, right? The truth will set you free. I do believe that that's absolutely true.
And Sharmain, if I can, thank you for sharing that. And, that's a journey that people that look like me need to be comfortable going on and need to understand that the pain that was caused and continues to be caused because of the legacy of slavery, the legacy of racism, bigotry, and it's not always easy. And to your point, right? You like to think individually we haven't done something wrong, but the truth of the matter is, by recognizing and truly understanding what went on, we can be part of the solution going forward. And what I've committed to at the ripe young age of 64 is listening and learning as much as I can. This morning, very early in the morning, I was flipping channels on the TV, and there was an ad, and I'm not even sure what the ad was for, but it was a young girl, a young African-American girl, obviously portrayed in the age of slavery. And the whole point of it was that she was about to be taken from her mother, her father, and sold to another slave owner. And I guess what I'd like to say is, it's not that I didn't pay attention to that in the past. I understand it at a certain level. I certainly feel it at a certain level. But it was so poignant to me this morning in preparing, thinking about this conversation and watching this ad for whatever this story is. I'm not even sure what it is. It hit me in the gut. And I think it's important that those of us that were not don't have the same experience of slavery as an African American, for example, that we allow ourselves to be hit in the gut in a way that makes us truly become part of the change. Not, as you said earlier, say the right things, but truly become part of the change.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, I absolutely agree. And some people will ask me, well, Charmaine, has anything really changed? And yes, we know that there have been changes over time. We've seen some level of progress. It's not like we haven't seen some progress in this country. A lot of demand, a lot of push, goodwill in a lot of places, looking to drive change. I tell people, like John Lewis, the late John Lewis, talked about the fact that, I'm no longer picking cotton. So yes, some things have changed. And I think about, when I went to Virginia as a child, and could only sit in the balcony of the movie theater, or I wasn't able to sit at the counter in the 5 and 10, or I went to the store with my grandparents, and the store clerk called my grandmother, Aunt Rosa, and my grandfather, Uncle Ed. And seeing my grandmother stand up and say, "I'm sorry, I am not related to you. My name is Mrs. Burton, and I'm married to this gentleman right here, Mr. Burton." So, we remember those kinds of indignities, yet they inspired us to go on to develop the civil rights movement, to develop the Black Power movement, to continue to fight against police brutality, to make sure that we were doing more about making educational opportunities available in our communities, as well as trying to make sure that the economic strength of our community would get improved too. So we've definitely done some of these things, but we need to figure out, how do we get it done on a broader scale? How do we get there faster, and how do we make sure that these things get built into all of our institutions to say that we believe in equality, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in our country, and that we're not going to be satisfied until we create that perfect union.
So, Charmaine, that as you were talking, because I did not experience those things, obviously, that you articulated and that you remember so vividly. But again, to my point about learning and trying to understand and then putting to action, let's give a current event that really drives home the road ahead, more that we have to do going forward. The COVID-19 pandemic. What we have seen as Independence Health Group, AmeriHealth Caritas, and all the entities that are affiliated with Independence, the poignant fact that there are barriers that are faced by the African American community and other communities of color that are a detriment to folks getting the highest level of quality care. I believe it's not a mistake that the percentage of African American people that have been diagnosed with COVID-19 is far greater than the Caucasian community. There's no mistake that when people do have it, of African American descent, that they show up in an emergency room, not necessarily at a primary care physician's office. There's no mistake that barriers exist in the system that are not of themselves today, I would call racist, but they create a situation where not all of us are treated equally across the healthcare system. So for us as an organization, and we joked earlier about my being your boss. Well, the truth of the matter is, you're on our regional board, and you are one of my bosses today. And I really like that, in that we are all working together of various backgrounds, of various races, to say, how can we break down those barriers to care, those disparities that make, on the whole, the African American community less healthy than other communities. And so that's what I mean by taking to heart and learning, and then on not only our personal and through our personal lives and endeavors, but through our professional endeavors, truly begin to break down the barriers, make sure the disparities are no longer acceptable, and begin to truly monitor that the health status of the African American community improves in a dramatic way over the next several years.
Thank you, Dan. And I think, your point of monitoring and measuring, that over the years, there's been resistance to sort of saying, we want to be aspirational, and if we're really trying, that really matters. I am seeing in this time, which I call a movement and not a moment, I do see that people are willing, just like we do everything else, the old adage, if it doesn't count if you don't measure it, right? So the idea that we're really sort of looking at how are we ultimately going to measure our progress, both in the short term and the long term. And I think that is a major shift in people owning that and recognizing it and feeling comfortable with it. And I think the other thing that's great about this is that people are understanding that in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, there are really great experts out there, people who have been studying this for a long period of time, have been looking at different systems and structures on how to help us do that. So I had an opportunity to meet with a group of DEI professionals recently, where they had an opportunity to talk about what's going on. And I'm seeing a lot more CEOs, Dan, like you, actually have DEI officers who are reporting directly to them, who are really looking at this whole issue about monitoring and really measuring success. So I think that's definitely a huge step in the right direction.
Sharmain, I'm glad you brought that up, because we traditionally have called our board committee. We are one of the few corporations that for a few decades have had a diversity and inclusion committee. Now we just at the last board meeting, as you know, decided that it's important that it's the DEI committee, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Paul Tufano, the chairman and CEO of Mer Health Caritas, has named an individual who is the president of the Washington, D.C. Medicaid managed care business for Mer Health Caritas, Karen Dale, and she is also now the chief diversity officer, reporting directly to Paul. We traditionally have not had that position at Independence. I felt it rested with the CEO. I'm thrilled that my successor, who will be starting on January 1st in the role as president and CEO of Independence, Greg Devins, will also be assuming that role. Greg happens to be African American. What I'm most proud of, and there's a couple folks that I really have to mention, our longtime chair of the DEI committee, Bruce Crawley, has been such an educator for all of us, regardless of our backgrounds and our races on the management team at Independence. And we count, and we have targets every single year in terms of the number of diverse associates that are hired and retained by Independence. And that's gender, race, and other differences. We have an effort to work throughout the organization to give those, particularly African Americans, opportunities to advance their career within Independence. We have an effort related to who we buy our goods from, who we buy our services from. And we have targets that the board signs off on every year that ensure that we work to meet those aggressive targets. Now, hey, we've got a lot to learn. We've got a journey ahead of us, but I feel very good that foundationally we are in a good place about being a leader going forward, not only in the business community as a whole, but in the communities we serve. So as we're learning, implementing, acting in a way that truly breaks down barriers, is more inclusive, and another piece of that makes everyone, regardless of their differences, feel comfortable and feel safe in our environment.
Well, Dan, that's absolutely terrific. And I could also tell the story of the first meeting that I had when you became chair of the chamber and you started asking right away, okay, what are we doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion? How is the chamber supporting the interest of the African American community? And I don't know if you saw the study that came out recently from Citigroup, which talked about not only diversity, equity, and inclusion and ending racism being the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. They talked about the fact that we are losing $16 trillion in our economy because we are allowing this ongoing racist set of policies to continue, and we are eliminating the opportunity for wealth in the minority business community, for wealth in communities around housing, for wealth growth because we're not doing enough around higher education. And so this is about strengthening the American economy, which we know ultimately supports everyone, and everybody will ultimately benefit. So it's such the right thing to do as well as the smart thing to do.
Sharmain, I could not agree more. And the way, I hate to be this blunt about it, but we say, picking up on what you said, not only is it consistent with our mission, not only is it the right thing to do, it's good business. It's good business. And let me give you an example. And you talked about engaging, whether it be recruiting or doing business in the African American community. We just started a relationship through one of my great mentors, Bob Bogle. I consider you a mentor too, Sharmain. But Bob, and there's 2 points I want to make here. Bob introduced me in a real significant way to Cheyney University. I knew Cheyney University. John Cheyney was a great basketball coach there years ago. I played in the gymnasium in games in college twice. I familiar with Cheyney, but never really thought, this is about education, personal education, never thought of Cheyney as an opportunity for us to recruit African American, primarily African American students to participate in executive internships, to think about careers in not only healthcare broadly, but in our sector, the health insurance sector, and then to develop a relationship with Cheyney University that begins to use the experiences that we have from these executive internship programs to begin to develop curriculum where we, from a corporate perspective, have an appreciation for and understanding of the types of students that we'd like to recruit, and then a distribution channel, a conduit to find those students, make them feel like they have an equal opportunity, and in some cases an enhanced opportunity to pursue the career of their dreams. And so independence, even as I depart and hand that off to Greg Devins, we have committed to the Cheyney University Capital Campaign, and we have started this initiative to create a true partnership in developing young talent, learning ourselves together with that student, and then giving them opportunities, whether at Independence or some other corporate setting, to pursue their dreams and achieve their dreams. For me, that all started with a conversation with Bob Bogle, who was just very honest with me in a very caring way about how we as a corporation, how I as an individual could be more of a force in this change. And so I say this because we have a lot of great companies here. A lot of the Chamber of Commerce is full with organizations who want to do the best they can and want to have that not only understanding that what they're doing is right, but the opportunity to understand that it's good business too. So the other thing, and I know we're going to talk about this in a little while, is the whole opportunity to change the way we police. And Bob Bogle and you have taught me a lot in that regard.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yes, we must get the policing issue right. We can't have, there are still people who go back again and look at the history of policing in America and not really, again, understand how the current police structure was developed based on racism and racist policies, whether it was looking at people who had escaped slavery and had come to Philadelphia and other cities, and people were organized to actually find them and ultimately take them back to re-enslave them, or whether it was about trying to make sure that people who moved here in order to be able to build a family and a home were told that they had to live only in a certain place or they could only have certain kinds of jobs. And that kind of sense of, control has to ultimately be dealt with. And I think we've done, some good work as it relates to the leadership within the police departments, but we've got to continue to figure out how do we, again, meet the hearts and minds of those that are there. And I think really building that community connection, making sure that the police job is clearly defined so that when we're talking about mental health, we're reaching out to Blue Cross. We're saying, look, we have mental health issues here. How do we best understand how to reach people when the expertise is in our healthcare systems and in our public systems? How can we ultimately make some of those kinds of things happen? When we're thinking about children, and you and I have and the great work that you've done around addiction and drug use, and reminding us all that that is a health issue, it is not a criminal issue. And how do we tackle that and make sure that we understand that we're bringing support and helping people move on to a better place? So we've got a lot to do on the policing side. But again, your leadership has helped us begin to think about that. And I'm hoping that as you are sort of deciding what you're going to do on January 1st, that you're still going to stay active and involved in our community. I think you have a great story to tell. So I don't know, maybe there's a great book out there somewhere, Dan, that we can have from you. But I think the lessons of someone who, as you said, is humble, but understands that, we've got to be successful too. I tell people that I learned a lot of lessons from you. And one of the ones that I tell people at the Urban Affairs Coalition quite often is I'm always trying to get to yes responsibly. And that's what I saw in how you are always trying to figure out when someone says, well, can we do this? Or can we fix this problem? Or can we make this better? Or can we be more inclusive? You're always trying to figure out, how can I really do that responsibly? And I think that kind of tone to set within our civic business and government sector is critical to us being able to ultimately tackle and end racism.
Sharmain, I could not agree more, and thank you for those kind words. And I've been blessed to be part of a community of great colleagues who, like-minded colleagues. We don't always agree on everything, but we do believe in our mission as an organization, both personally and professionally. What you just said, there are so many different kernels that I would like to pick on and expand. And we've known each other and learned from each other for a number of years. But if I can just do them in quick succession. So I mentioned Bob Bogle. What Bob Bogle said to me as I asked him his perspective on policing, he said, well, let's start with this, Dan. Black people want to be safe too. So we have that common thread regardless of where we come from. We all want to be protected by law enforcement. We all want to feel that they have our backs. He said the difference is, and I'm paraphrasing here, the difference is that far too many times our community feels threatened by the practices of police forces. And we had a really constructive conversation about what it comes down to. Just as at the beginning we talked about changing our mindsets, changing how we feel in our heart, in our souls, and then providing the training tools and the constant reminders and regulations that structure policing in such a way that when confronting an individual in the streets of West Philadelphia who clearly has mental health, behavioral health issues, that you have the right equipment in place, that you have the phone number to contact the right healthcare professional to be there at the right time, who knows how to diffuse a situation. So it's about training, 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 getting rid of those who aren't willing to have the change in mind and heart, and really continuing to support those good police leaders, those good community-focused law enforcement officers, and put them in a position where they can succeed regardless of what community they're in a way that they are trusted, believed, and become part of the very fiber of the community. There are examples that we in the Philadelphia area need to learn from. There's some really interesting things going on in the Camden community, Camden County community. Again, not perfect, but leading us in the right direction. We need to continue that. But I think also you bring up a number of really important points that I see post December 31st, an opportunity for me in a very low-key way to be supportive. And I'm hoping that whether it's leaders like you or staying involved at the chamber at a certain level, pursuing my personal passion, my family's passion around recovery and helping those who do go through recovery re-enter the community in a very constructive and positive way, that I'll be able to be a teammate for those that want to make these positive changes.
That's terrific, Dan. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So, I've got like a list of jobs, but I won't do it right now. I'll do it offline. But I do think that your unique set of experiences, you've worked in government, you've worked in the private sector, you've worked in the community. I mean, you have all of those things that are a part of your experience, as well as your own personal life and the struggles that you've had there. All of those things are really critically important for us to be able to ultimately move ahead. You have really great relationships within the African American community as well as other communities as well. So it is going to take really great leadership and partnership. And, I love the fact that we've been able to partner over the years. And, as we were, looking at this issue, I said, Dan, we've got to do something more about ending racism. Like, how can we begin some kind of process of engagement and healing? And you said, okay, Sharmain, let's talk about that. Let's try to figure out what we can do. And I'm glad that out of that conversation, we have created an effort to begin a conversation around that. We're going to be bringing together people from the community, and which include the business community and the private sector, to continue this work together, just like the conversation that we're having today, to continue to build on that and to make sure that we are understanding where we can really partner and really make things happen.
Well, Sharmain, the only response I can give is that you have been such a great leader, and just as you say, I have a level of respect in the African American community. You are so respected across the broad community. Your role as now on the executive committee of the Chamber of Commerce. Anytime there is a crisis or a need, one of the first names that comes up is Sharmain Matlock-Turner. And so in terms of the two of us, I will always answer the phone and always be part of initiatives that you think are important for us to participate throughout the community. But we need to recruit others. We need to be beacons ourselves to bring folks of all backgrounds, of all races together to one say, only thing we're going to tolerate is positive change. We're going to not only talk about it, but we're going to make sure we influence those changes in the public sector, in the private sector, and I believe where real change can occur when the public and private sectors come together to solve issues in the community. And there is no greater issue that needs to be solved in our broader community than racism and the negative impact it has on everything that is important to us as a universe of men and women.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very, very much. This has been a terrific conversation. I really appreciate your candor, but as importantly, your hard work in this space and knowing that we're going to be able to count on you as we all continue this work together. As you know, we are not going to allow this just to be a moment. This is a movement. The coalition started 50 years ago after the assassination of Dr. King in partnership with the business community, with government, with activists, with communities, because we said we must drive change. And we are still committed to that work. We know that we have more work to do, but we are going to stay in partnership with you and others to make sure that we do ultimately end racism in our city, in our state, in our country, and in our world.
Thank you, Sharmain. This has been an honor.
Thank you.